How would you feel if, just after your wedding, you were handed legal papers by the same man everyone thought was the pathetic, clueless husband? What if your own joke at the reception was the final proof he needed to turn your whole life upside down? This is what happened to me, all because I thought secrets made me special. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I'm Zephyra Quince, 32 years old, and I used to think I was the smartest person in any room. I worked as an office administrator at Henderson and Associates, a mid-sized engineering firm where my husband Thomas also worked as a civil engineer. We'd been married for 8 years, had a 7-year-old daughter named Poppy, and from the outside, we looked like the perfect suburban family. But perfection is boring. At least, that's what I told myself when I started my affair with Evan Dorsey, my charming coworker, who made me feel alive in ways Thomas never could. Thomas was always so serious, so methodical, so predictable. Evan was spontaneous, funny, and dangerous in all the right ways. I thought I had it all figured out. I thought I was clever enough to keep both worlds spinning without them ever colliding. I was wrong. The Riverside Hotel ballroom glittered with fairy lights and the warm glow of success. It was my cousin Miranda's wedding reception, and the champagne had been flowing freely for hours. I felt radiant in my emerald green dress, my blonde hair perfectly curled, receiving compliments from relatives I hadn't seen in years. Thomas sat beside me at the family table, looking handsome but distant in his navy suit. He'd been quiet all evening, which wasn't unusual, but something felt different tonight. His mother Margaret, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, kept glancing between us with an expression I couldn't quite read. My own mother, Sonia, was having a wonderful time, laughing loudly at every joke and already planning her next glass of wine. "Ladies and gentlemen," the DJ announced, "we'd like to invite family members to share a few words about the happy couple." This was my moment. I'd been planning what to say all week, crafting the perfect blend of heartfelt sentiment and witty humor that would remind everyone why I was always the life of the party. I stood gracefully, my heels clicking against the hardwood floor as I made my way to the microphone. "Thank you," I began, my voice carrying easily across the room. "I've known Miranda since we were children, getting into trouble and sharing secrets that our mothers still don't know about." Laughter rippled through the crowd, and I felt that familiar rush of being the center of attention. I caught sight of Evan near the bar, looking devastatingly handsome in his black suit. He'd come as my friend since his girlfriend was out of town. The thrill of having him here, right under Thomas's nose, made my pulse quicken. "Marriage is about trust," I continued, "about sharing your life with someone who truly knows you. But it's also about maintaining a little mystery, isn't it?" More chuckles from the audience. Thomas shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "For instance," I said, warming to my theme, "my dear friend Evan here can tell you all about our spontaneous road trip to Nashville last month." Thomas was working late again, as usual, and Evan suggested we just drive down for the weekend to see some live music. It was absolutely magical, the kind of adventure that reminds you you're still alive. I winked at Evan, who had gone slightly pale. "Remember that wild road trip, Evan? Some secrets are best left off the itinerary." The crowd laughed, but I noticed several family members exchanging glances. "The point is," I said, trying to steer back to Miranda, "marriage should have room for spontaneity, for the unexpected moments that make life worth living. Miranda and David, may your marriage be filled with beautiful surprises." I raised my glass and the room followed suit, but as I walked back to my table, I noticed Thomas was no longer in his seat. I spotted him near the exit, his phone pressed to his ear, his free hand running through his dark hair in the way it did when he was stressed. Margaret was watching me with undisguised disapproval. "That was quite a speech, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Thank you," I replied, choosing to ignore her tone. "I thought it went well." Thomas's sister, Rachel, a no-nonsense woman in her 30s, leaned across the table. "Zephyra, don't you think it was a bit inappropriate to talk about secret trips at someone else's wedding?" "Oh, Rachel, don't be such a prude," my mother interjected, coming to my defense. "Zephyra was just sharing a funny story. Thomas works too much anyway. Good for her for having some fun." "Fun," Margaret repeated, the word sounding like poison in her mouth. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "If you'll excuse me, I need some air." I watched her walk toward the exit where Thomas had disappeared, a small knot of unease forming in my stomach, but I pushed it away. Thomas was probably just taking a work call. He was always taking work calls. And if he was upset about my speech, well, maybe it would motivate him to be more spontaneous himself. Evan appeared at my elbow, his usual confidence replaced by nervous energy. "Zeph, can we talk for a minute?" "Not now," I whispered, still smiling for the benefit of anyone watching. "Later." "This is important," he insisted. "That speech was perfect," I cut him off. "Don't overthink it." But as I looked around the ballroom, I noticed more people whispering, more sideways glances in my direction. Rachel had followed Margaret and Thomas outside, leaving me alone with my mother and a table full of increasingly uncomfortable relatives. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "We need to talk when we get home." I typed back, "Everything okay? You seemed upset." His response was immediate and cold. "Just come find me when you're ready to leave." The knot in my stomach tightened, but I forced myself to smile and rejoin the celebration. Whatever Thomas's problem was, we'd sort it out later. I wasn't going to let his mood ruin my evening. Monday morning at Henderson and Associates felt different somehow. The usual office chatter seemed muted, and I caught several coworkers glancing at me when they thought I wasn't looking. I settled at my desk with my coffee, trying to shake off the lingering tension from the weekend. Thomas had barely spoken to me since the wedding. When I'd tried to bring up his strange behavior, he'd simply said he was tired and needed space to think. He'd slept in the guest room both Saturday and Sunday night, claiming he didn't want to disturb my sleep with his restlessness. I was scrolling through emails when Evan appeared at my cubicle, looking uncharacteristically serious. "We need to talk," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "I'm busy," I replied, not looking up from my screen. "Zephyra, I'm serious. That speech on Friday night, people are talking." That got my attention. I looked up to find his usually confident face creased with worry. "What do you mean, people are talking?" "My girlfriend heard about it from her friend who was at the wedding. She's asking questions about our road trip. And frankly, after hearing what you said, I'm asking questions too. Why would you mention it so publicly?" I felt a flash of irritation. "It was just a joke, Evan. Don't be so paranoid." "A joke? You basically announced to your entire family that we went away together while your husband was working. How is that funny?" "Because Thomas never suspects anything," I snapped, then immediately regretted the sharpness in my voice. I lowered it to a whisper. "Look, you're overreacting. Nobody thinks anything inappropriate happened." Evan stared at me for a long moment. "Maybe that's the problem, Zeph. Maybe you've gotten so comfortable lying that you don't even realize when you're being reckless." Before I could respond, he walked away, leaving me staring after him in shock. Evan had never spoken to me like that before. Our affair had always been light, fun, exciting, not heavy with recriminations and worry. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept wandering. Around lunchtime, my phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "Can you come home early today? We need to discuss some things." I typed back, "I'm really swamped here. Can it wait until tonight?" "No, this is important." The finality in his message made my stomach clench. I glanced around the office, then made a decision. I needed to clean up any loose ends before whatever confrontation Thomas had planned. I spent the next hour going through my phone, deleting old text messages between Evan and me. Most were innocent enough, work-related conversations, friendly banter, but a few were more suggestive, remnants of the early days of our affair when everything felt like a thrilling game. As I worked, I crafted a text to Thomas. "Sorry, boss is making me stay late for the Morrison project. We'll be home around 8. It was a lie, of course. I planned to leave at my regular time, but I wanted him to think I was working hard, being responsible. Maybe it would soften whatever mood he was in. My phone rang. My mother calling from her real estate office across town. "Darling, how are you feeling after the wedding? You looked absolutely radiant." "I'm fine, Mom. A little tired, maybe." "Well, you certainly livened up that stuffy reception. Margaret looked like she'd swallowed a lemon during your speech." She laughed, the sound sharp and satisfied. "That woman has always thought she was better than everyone else." "Mom, please don't start." "I'm just saying you deserve to have some fun. Thomas works all the time, and you're still young and beautiful. There's nothing wrong with enjoying yourself." Her words should have been comforting, but instead they made me feel more unsettled. "I should go. Work is crazy today." "Of course, dear, but remember what I said. You don't owe anyone an explanation for living your life." After hanging up, I returned to deleting messages, but something was nagging at me. I opened my purse to grab some gum and froze. There, folded neatly between my wallet and makeup bag, was a printed copy of a text conversation between Evan and me from 3 weeks ago. Evan: "Can't wait to see you tonight. I've been thinking about you all day." Me: "Thomas is working late again. Perfect timing." Evan: "Your place or mine?" Me: "Mine. He won't be home until after 10. My hands shook as I stared at the paper. I hadn't printed this. I would never have printed something so incriminating, which meant someone else had access to my messages. Someone who wanted me to know they had access. My phone buzzed with another text from Thomas. "Actually, never mind about coming home early. Take your time at work. We'll talk tonight." The casual tone felt wrong, like he was playing a game I didn't understand. I looked around the office with new eyes, wondering who might be watching, who might be reporting back to my husband. Evan walked past my desk without making eye contact, his shoulders tense with stress. For the first time since our affair began, I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. By Wednesday, I was convinced I was being paranoid. Thomas had been polite but distant since the wedding, and while that wasn't entirely unusual, the printed text message in my purse still haunted me. I'd confronted him about it Tuesday night, asking if he'd been going through my things, but he'd simply looked at me with those calm brown eyes and said, "Why would I do that, Zephyra? Don't you trust me?" The way he turned the question back on me had left me speechless. I decided what we needed was some normalcy, some social interaction to break the tension. So I organized a casual brunch at Cafe Luna downtown, inviting my mother, Margaret, Rachel, and a few friends from our neighborhood. It would be a chance to show everyone that Thomas and I were fine, that any gossip from the wedding was just silly speculation. Cafe Luna was bustling with the usual Wednesday crowd. Young professionals grabbing quick lunches, mothers with strollers meeting for coffee, and retirees lingering over newspapers. I'd reserved a large table near the windows, where the natural light would be flattering and the atmosphere cheerful. I arrived first, wearing a soft pink sweater that Thomas had once said brought out my eyes, and arranged myself at the table where I could see everyone as they entered. My mother arrived next, looking elegant in her navy blazer, followed by my friend Jessica from down the street, who brought along her usual arsenal of neighborhood gossip. Margaret and Rachel entered together, and I immediately noticed their matching expressions of polite reservation. They greeted me cordially, but without warmth, taking seats across the table rather than beside me. Thomas was the last to arrive, apologizing for being late due to a client call. He kissed my cheek perfunctorily and sat at the far end of the table, close enough to be part of the conversation, but far enough to maintain distance. "So," Jessica began after we'd ordered, "that was quite the wedding on Friday. Miranda looked beautiful, didn't she?" "Absolutely gorgeous," I agreed. "And the venue was perfect. I loved how they decorated the ballroom." Your speech was certainly memorable, Margaret said, her tone carefully neutral. I felt my mother tense beside me. I thought Zephyra's speech was delightful, Sonia said firmly. She's always been such a natural speaker. Oh yes, I said, warming to the subject. I love public speaking. Thomas always says I should have been a performer instead of working in an office. I glanced at my husband, but he was studying his menu with unusual intensity. Speaking of work, Jessica said, how are things at the engineering firm? Thomas, you've been there for years now, haven't you? 8 years, Thomas replied without looking up. And Zephyra joined later. 5 years ago, I said. It's been wonderful working with such talented people. My colleague, Evan, for instance, he's incredibly creative and spontaneous, always coming up with interesting ideas for projects and activities. I noticed Rachel's eyebrows rise slightly. Activities? Oh, team-building things, like that Nashville trip I mentioned in my speech. Thomas was swamped with the Peterson project, working until midnight every night, and Evan suggested we drive down for the weekend to hear some live music. It was exactly what I needed, a chance to remember there's a world outside of spreadsheets and deadlines. How thoughtful of Evan, Margaret said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. And Thomas didn't mind you traveling with another man. Mind? I laughed, perhaps a bit too loudly. Margaret, this isn't the 1950s. Thomas trusts me completely. Don't you, honey? Thomas finally looked up from his menu, his gaze meeting mine for the first time all morning. I trust you to make your own choices, Zephyra. Something in his tone made me uncomfortable, but I pressed on. Exactly. Thomas knows I need more excitement in my life than he can provide. He's wonderful, of course, but he's so serious all the time, so focused on work and responsibilities. Sometimes a girl needs to feel spontaneous and alive. By going away with other men? Rachel asked bluntly. The table fell silent. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, but I kept my smile in place. By having friendships outside my marriage, yes. I'm sorry if that threatens you, Rachel, but some of us refuse to let marriage turn us into boring housewives. Zephyra, my mother gasped, but she was more shocked by Rachel's directness than my response. Rachel's face flushed red. Boring housewives. I have a career, Zephyra. I have interests and friends and a full life. What I don't have is a husband sitting here, listening to me talk about taking romantic getaways with other men. It wasn't romantic, I protested, but my voice sounded shrill even to my own ears. We're friends. We work together. Thomas, tell them. But Thomas remained silent, his expression unreadable. Under the table, I noticed Poppy, who had been colouring quietly in her activity book, had stopped drawing and was looking anxiously between the adults. You know what? Rachel said, standing abruptly and grabbing her purse. I think I've heard enough. Margaret, are you coming? Margaret rose as well, her movements sharp with anger. Thomas, call me later. We need to talk. They left without another word, Rachel's heels clicking angrily against the cafe's tile floor. The remaining diners at nearby tables had stopped their conversations to watch the drama unfold. Well, Jessica said awkwardly, that was intense. My mother reached over and patted my hand. Don't mind them, darling. They're just jealous that you're still young and vibrant. Some women can't handle it when others refuse to settle for mediocrity. Mom, please, I said, suddenly feeling exhausted. No, I mean it. Thomas, you should be grateful to have a wife who still has spirit, who doesn't just sit at home waiting for you to pay attention to her. Zephyra deserves friends who appreciate her energy and zest for life. Thomas looked at my mother for a long moment, then at me. You're absolutely right, Sonia. Zephyra deserves exactly what she's chosen. Before I could ask what he meant by that, Poppy started crying. I want to go home, she said, her small voice cutting through the tension. Everyone's being mean. Thomas immediately scooped her up, his face softening with concern. It's okay, sweetheart. We'll go home right now. As he carried our daughter toward the exit, he paused beside my chair. Zephyra, I need you to come home tonight. We have some things to discuss that can't wait any longer. The finality in his voice made my blood run cold. "Thomas, what's going on?" "Tonight," he repeated, then walked away, leaving me sitting with my mother and Jessica, surrounded by the wreckage of what was supposed to be a pleasant brunch. "Don't worry, dear," my mother said, squeezing my hand. "Men get moody sometimes. He'll get over it." But as I watched my husband's retreating figure, I had the sinking feeling that this time, Thomas wasn't going to get over anything. I spent the rest of Wednesday afternoon in a state of nervous energy, unable to concentrate on work and dreading the conversation Thomas had demanded. By the time I pulled into our driveway at 6:30, my hands were shaking and my stomach was churning with anxiety. Our house looked the same as always, a modest 2-story colonial with blue shutters and a well-maintained garden that Thomas tended every weekend. But tonight, it felt ominous, like a courthouse where I was about to face judgment. I found Thomas in his study, a small room off the living room where he kept his engineering books and project files. He was sitting behind his desk, still wearing his work clothes, but he'd loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves. In front of him sat a manila folder thick with papers. "Where's Poppy?" I asked, hovering in the doorway. "At my mother's. I thought it would be better if we had privacy for this conversation." The fact that he'd planned ahead, that he'd arranged childcare and prepared materials, made my mouth go dry. "Thomas, you're scaring me. What's going on?" He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Please sit down." I perched on the edge of the chair, my designer handbag clutched in my lap like a shield. "If this is about the brunch today, I'm sorry things got heated. Rachel was being completely unreasonable and—" "This isn't about the brunch," Thomas interrupted quietly, "although your performance there was certainly illuminating." "My performance?" He opened the manila folder and pulled out a photograph, sliding it across the desk toward me. It was a picture from Evan's Instagram account. The two of us at a honky-tonk bar in Nashville, his arm around my waist, both of us laughing at something off camera. I was wearing the red dress I'd bought specifically for that trip, and my body language made it clear this was more than a friendly outing. "I don't understand," I said. Though of course I did. "How did you get this?" "Evan's social media is public, Zephyra. Anyone can see his photos." Thomas pulled out another document, a printout of our hotel reservation. "The Hermitage Hotel. 1 room, king bed, registered under your name." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Thomas, I can explain." "Can you?" He pulled out more papers, credit card statements, text message logs, even a receipt from the lingerie store where I'd bought the black lace set I'd worn that weekend. "Because I'd really like to hear your explanation for all of this." I stared at the evidence spread across his desk, my mind racing for a plausible story. "We got separate rooms," I said finally. The hotel must have made a mistake on the paperwork. Thomas reached into the folder again and produced another photograph. This one clearly taken from a security camera, showing Evan and me entering the hotel elevator together, his hand on the small of my back in an unmistakably intimate gesture. "Try again," he said. Tears started flowing down my cheeks, but whether from genuine remorse or panic, I wasn't sure. "Thomas, please. You don't understand how lonely I've been. You work all the time, and when you are home, you're always tired or distracted. I felt invisible in my own marriage." "So you decided to have an affair?" The word hung in the air between us like a weapon. I'd never heard Thomas say it out loud before, and the clinical precision with which he delivered it made me flinch. "It wasn't an affair," I protested. "It was just friendship that got a little carried away. It didn't mean anything, Thomas. You're the one I married. You're the father of my child." "A friendship that got carried away." Thomas repeated my words slowly, as if tasting them. "Is that what you call the past 6 months of lying to me? The secret phone calls, the fake overtime, the elaborate stories about girls' nights out that never happened? How do you know about—" I started, then stopped myself. "About what, Zephyra?" "About the fact that you told me you were having dinner with Jessica last Tuesday, when you were actually at Evan's apartment, about the fake conference in Atlanta that was really a weekend at his cabin, about the promotion celebration that was just an excuse to stay out until 3 in the morning. Each revelation hit me like a physical blow. You've been spying on me. I've been paying attention to my wife, something I apparently should have started doing much sooner. The study door opened, and I turned to see Margaret walking in, her face set in hard lines of disapproval. Behind her came my mother, looking flustered and defensive. "What is she doing here?" I demanded, pointing at Margaret. "I asked her to come," Thomas said calmly. "I thought both our mothers should hear this conversation." "Thomas called me this afternoon," Margaret said, her voice cold as winter. "He told me everything. How could you do this to him, Zephyra? How could you humiliate him in front of the entire family?" My mother pushed past Margaret and came to stand behind my chair. "Now wait just a minute. I don't know what kind of kangaroo court this is supposed to be, but Zephyra doesn't have to sit here and be attacked by everyone." "Mom, please," I whispered, but she was just getting started. "Thomas, if your wife felt the need to seek companionship elsewhere, maybe you should look at your own behavior. When was the last time you took her somewhere nice? When did you last surprise her with flowers or plan a romantic evening?" "When did I last what?" Thomas stood up slowly, his calm demeanor finally cracking. "Sonia, are you seriously suggesting that my failure to buy flowers justifies adultery? I'm suggesting that marriage is a two-way street, and if you'd been paying more attention to your wife's needs—" "Her needs?" Thomas's voice rose. "What about my needs? What about my need to trust my wife? My need to believe that when she says she's working late, she's actually at the office instead of in another man's bed?" "Thomas," I said desperately, "please don't do this. We can work through this. We can go to counseling. I'll end things with Evan completely." He looked at me with something that might have been pity. "You still don't get it, do you? This isn't about Evan. This is about the fact that you've been lying to me for months. It's about the fact that you stood up at a family wedding and made jokes about your affair while I sat there like a fool. It's about the fact that even now, caught red-handed with evidence of your betrayal, you're still trying to manipulate the situation." "I'm not manipulating anything," I cried. "I'm trying to save our marriage." "No," Thomas said quietly. "You're trying to save yourself from the consequences of your choices." He walked around the desk and stood in front of me, close enough that I could smell his familiar cologne, could see the pain in his eyes that he was trying so hard to hide. "I loved you, Zephyra. I would have done anything for you, but I won't be made a fool of anymore." "Thomas, please." "You'll be hearing from my lawyer," he said, then walked out of his own study, leaving me alone with two angry mothers and a folder full of evidence that my marriage was over. In the distance, I heard the front door close and Thomas's car start in the driveway. Margaret followed him out without another word, but my mother remained, her hand on my shoulder. "Don't worry, darling," she said, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. "He'll come around. Men always do." But as I sat staring at the photographs and documents scattered across Thomas's desk, I had the terrible feeling that this time my mother was wrong. The next few days passed in a blur of whispered conversations and averted gazes. Word of my affair had spread through our social circle with the speed of wildfire, aided no doubt by my own careless bragging at the wedding and the disastrous brunch confrontation. Thursday morning at the office was particularly brutal. I arrived to find several coworkers clustered around the coffee machine, their conversation stopping abruptly when they saw me. Evan was nowhere to be seen, and when I asked his cubicle neighbor where he was, she simply shrugged and said he'd called in sick. By lunchtime, I'd received 3 separate visits from HR representatives asking about workplace relationships and professional boundaries. I maintained my innocence, insisting that Evan and I were merely friends, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. The worst part was picking up Poppy from school. I'd always enjoyed the social aspect of school pickup, chatting with other mothers, organizing playdates, being part of the community. But now, the other parents seemed to form a protective circle around their children, as if adultery might be contagious. Mummy, Poppy said as we drove home Thursday afternoon, why was Mrs. Peterson acting weird when she saw you? What do you mean, sweetheart? She always says hi to you, but today she just looked away and walked really fast to her car. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Maybe she was in a hurry. And why hasn't Daddy been home? Is he still mad about the restaurant? The innocent questions from my 7-year-old daughter were like daggers to my heart. How could I explain that Daddy wasn't coming home because Mommy had made some very bad choices? Daddy's just working a lot right now, I said, the lie tasting bitter in my mouth. That evening, I tried to distract myself by scrolling through social media, but that proved to be a mistake. Rachel had unfriended me on Facebook, and several of our mutual friends had done the same. The photos from Miranda's wedding were still up, and I could see that people were commenting on my speech, though I couldn't read what they were saying since I was no longer connected to most of them. I decided to post something myself, a cheerful status about rising above negativity and not letting small-minded people bring you down. Within minutes, the post had several likes from my mother and a few distant relatives, but I noticed that none of my local friends had engaged with it. Friday brought even worse news. I arrived at work to find a formal envelope on my desk, delivered by courier. Inside was a letter from Margaret's attorney, informing me that she was filing for grandparent visitation rights and requesting a formal custody evaluation. My hand shook as I read the legal language. Margaret was essentially arguing that I was an unfit mother due to my adultery and deceptive behavior, and that Poppy's emotional well-being required supervised visits with her paternal grandmother. I immediately called my mother, who rushed over to the office to read the letter herself. "This is outrageous," she fumed. "That woman has no right to interfere in your parenting. We need to get you a lawyer immediately." "Mom, I don't know if I can afford." "Don't worry about money. Your father and I will help. We're not going to let Margaret steal your daughter just because she's angry about your personal life." But even as my mother made plans to fight back, I could see the worry in her eyes. The situation was spiraling beyond anything we had anticipated. The final blow came Friday afternoon. I was leaving the office when I spotted Evan in the parking garage, loading boxes into his car. He looked up when he heard my footsteps, his face immediately tightening with anxiety. "Evan, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all week." "I know," he said, not meeting my eyes. "I've been avoiding your calls." "Why? We need to talk about what's happening. Thomas has evidence, and people are gossiping, and—" "Zephyra, stop." He closed his trunk and turned to face me fully. "I'm transferring to our Dallas office. I leave Monday." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What? You can't just leave. What about us?" "There is no us," he said firmly. "There never really was. It was just sex and excitement and a way to feel young again. But it's over now. Evan, please. I've lost everything for you. My marriage, my friends, my reputation." "You lost those things because of your own choices," he interrupted. "I never asked you to leave your husband. I never promised you anything beyond what we had in the moment. So you're just going to abandon me when I need support the most?" He looked at me with something that might have been pity. "Zephyra, you're a grown woman who made adult decisions. The consequences of those decisions aren't my responsibility." He got in his car and drove away, leaving me standing alone in the parking garage, finally understanding that I had been living in a fantasy of my own creation. That night, as I sat in my empty house with Poppy asleep upstairs, I tried to make sense of how everything had fallen apart so quickly. Just 2 weeks ago, I had felt clever and desirable and in control. Now I was facing divorce, custody battles, and social exile. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check your mailbox." With a growing sense of dread, I walked outside and opened the mailbox to find another formal envelope. This one was from Thomas's attorney, and even before I opened it, I knew it would contain the papers that would officially end my marriage. As I stood in my driveway, holding the envelope that represented the destruction of my life, I realized that Thomas had been right about one thing. I was finally going to face the consequences of my choices. The law offices of Peterson Martinez and Associates occupied the entire 15th floor of downtown's tallest building. I sat in the reception area the following Monday morning, my best suit wrinkled from a sleepless weekend, waiting to meet with the attorney my parents had hired. Sarah Martinez was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who specialized in family law. She reviewed my case with the clinical detachment of a surgeon examining a patient, occasionally making notes on her legal pad. "Mrs. Quince," she said finally, "I have to be honest with you. Your husband's attorney has built an extremely strong case." She spread the documents across her mahogany desk. The same evidence Thomas had shown me, plus additional materials I hadn't seen before. Bank statements showing cash withdrawals that corresponded to my dates with Evan. Cell phone records documenting hundreds of calls and texts between us. Even a sworn affidavit from a private investigator who had photographed me entering and leaving Evan's apartment building. "He hired a private investigator," I gasped. "3 months ago, according to these reports. Your husband suspected something was wrong and decided to gather evidence before confronting you." I stared at the surveillance photos, seeing myself through a stranger's eyes. In every image, I looked guilty, sneaking around, checking over my shoulder, clearly engaged in deceptive behavior. "The adultery itself isn't necessarily the biggest problem," Sarah continued. "Texas is a no-fault divorce state, so infidelity doesn't automatically determine property division or custody. However, the pattern of deception and the public humiliation aspect work strongly in your husband's favor." "Public humiliation?" She pulled out a video file on her tablet. "Your wedding speech has been viewed over 50,000 times on social media. Someone recorded it and posted it with the caption, 'Cheating wife brags about affair at family wedding.' It's gone viral." My stomach dropped as I watched myself on the small screen, making jokes about my secret trip, while Thomas sat in the background, his face a mask of controlled pain. The comments below the video were brutal. Strangers from around the world calling me everything from trashy to evil. "There's more," Sarah said gently. "Your husband is requesting primary custody of your daughter, with you receiving supervised visitation until you complete a psychological evaluation and parenting classes. He can't take Poppy away from me. I'm her mother. Mrs. Quince, the court's primary concern is the child's best interests. Your husband has documented evidence that your behavior has negatively impacted your daughter's emotional well-being. Her teachers have reported that she's become withdrawn and anxious over the past few months." The words hit me like physical blows. I thought I'd been so careful to keep my affair separate from my family life, but apparently, children notice more than adults realize. "What about the house? Our savings?" "Your husband is willing to split the marital assets 50-50, but he wants the house since he'll have primary custody. He's also requesting that you pay child support based on your income." I left the attorney's office in a daze, the legal papers feeling like lead weights in my briefcase. Everything I had taken for granted, my home, my daughter, my financial security, was being stripped away as methodically as Thomas approached everything else in his life. That afternoon, I received a call from HR asking me to come in for a meeting. I found myself sitting across from Janet Morrison, the head of human resources, and David Chen, our department manager. "Zephyra," Janet began, "we've received several complaints about inappropriate workplace relationships and unprofessional behavior." "I haven't done anything wrong," I protested, though the words sounded hollow even to me. "We have security footage of you and Mr. Dorsey in compromising situations in the office after hours," David said, sliding a manila envelope across the table. "We also have testimony from multiple employees about your public discussion of personal matters that created a hostile work environment." I opened the envelope to find still images from security cameras, Evan and me kissing in the break room, embracing in the supply closet, leaving the building together late at night. The timestamps showed these encounters had been happening for months. We're terminating your employment effective immediately, Janet continued. You'll receive 2 weeks severance pay, and your health insurance will continue for 30 days. You can't fire me for this. It's discrimination. We're terminating you for violation of company policy regarding workplace relationships and professional conduct, David corrected. You signed an acknowledgement of these policies when you were hired. I walked out of the building, carrying a card box of my personal belongings, past coworkers who avoided eye contact and security guards who watched my every move. The humiliation was complete. I had lost my job, my marriage, and my reputation in the span of 2 weeks. That evening, I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by legal documents and termination papers, trying to figure out how to explain to Poppy that Mommy wouldn't be working anymore and that she might have to live with Daddy in a different house. My phone rang. Thomas calling for the first time since our confrontation. Hello, Zephyra. Thomas, please, can we talk about this? Can we try to work something out? I'm calling to let you know that I'll be picking up Poppy for dinner tomorrow night. My attorney will send you the formal visitation schedule, but I wanted to give you advance notice. She's going to be so confused. Can't we at least try counselling? For her sake. There was a long pause. Zephyra, do you remember what you said in your wedding speech? About marriage needing room for beautiful surprises? Thomas, well, here's your surprise. I'm not the fool you thought I was. I'm not the boring, clueless husband who would just accept being betrayed and humiliated. I'm a man who loved his wife enough to fight for his marriage, and when that failed, I'm fighting for my daughter. I never meant for any of this to happen. Yes, you did. Every choice you made, every lie you told, every time you came home to me after being with him, you meant for all of it to happen. You just didn't mean to get caught. The line went quiet for a moment, and I could hear him breathing on the other end. The papers will be finalized next week, he said finally. After that, all communication goes through our attorneys. Goodbye, Zephyra. As I sat alone in the house that would soon belong to someone else, holding the phone that had gone silent, I finally understood the full scope of what I had lost. Thomas hadn't just left me. He had systematically dismantled the life I had taken for granted, using the same methodical precision he brought to his engineering projects. I had thought I was so clever, playing games and keeping secrets. But Thomas had been playing a different game entirely, one where actions had consequences and choices had prices. And in that game, I had lost everything that mattered. 6 months later, I was living in a studio apartment across town, working as a receptionist at a dental office, and seeing my daughter every other weekend under court supervision. The viral video of my wedding speech had cost me most of my friends and made me unemployable in my chosen field. Thomas had remarried, a quiet, kind woman from his church who treated Poppy like her own daughter. They lived in our old house, in the life that should have been mine, while I struggled to rebuild from nothing. My mother still insisted that Thomas had overreacted, that men were supposed to forgive and forget. But as I watched my ex-husband and his new wife at Poppy's school play, seeing the genuine happiness in his eyes that had been missing for years, I finally understood the truth. I hadn't lost Thomas because he was vindictive or cruel. I had lost him because I had never deserved him in the first place. And that knowledge, more than any legal judgment or social exile, was the price I would pay for the rest of my life.